G'day, I'm Pete Hughes, and you've clicked on the Reach Australia podcast. What we've got for you today is the first of 4 workshops on the concept of multi-site churches. International expert Wade Burnett is introducing us to the world of multi-site and his own personal experience and journey with it. Enjoy.
America, right now, I would talk for about 5 minutes, even more flowery than Derek did about me. I would outdo him. I've been in the country since Wednesday, and as I've been in different meetings with churches, I've actually enjoyed watching Australians get really uncomfortable when I do that. So there's a big part of me that wants to, because I can watch Derek while that happens. But I've also sort of reacclimated to Australia and have refreshed my cultural translation ability. So I'll just say thank you, Derek. That was pretty good. At every level. So this first session, guys, just to set expectations for what we're doing, we're gonna teach a lot this first session on where this model comes from. I want you guys to have all of the nuance that's available to you in a setting like this, strengths and weaknesses. I trust you to discern what applies or doesn't from where all of this came from. I'm not intentionally not selling anything. I didn't write a book. I'm not identified with a model. And so I feel personally complete freedom to turn all this over and look at it with you in ways that might help you, or the biggest takeaway here might be this is not the approach for us, which I would celebrate as well if you get to that point of clarity. My goal when we teach at conferences is to pursue 2 kind of light bulb moments for everybody. That's what I think would be a great win. And so those won't be the same 2 for every church. But as we put all of this out there, I think that could be a pretty clear shared goal for all of us. That's the setting where I met my first Australian friend. It's the first time I met one of you guys, somebody who's in this room today, where all of this relationship began. I was teaching, or actually more observing, but teaching with somebody I'll introduce here in a minute at a conference in Florida. It was like this. We would typically go around and do what we just did and share who all's in the room. I do that for 2 reasons. One is it does, as Derek said, give me a gauge for what might be helpful to you guys. I don't want to teach on something that's not even present in the room. That's not super helpful. So it does give me a sense of what might kind of be that midpoint that's helpful to all of us. But the other thing it does is it lets you all know who's in the room. So one of the most helpful things is to find out who else in here is in a similar stage to you. And so I would encourage you, what some of your first notes need to be, if you just said, I'm exploring this, you need to have written down or at least made eye contact with where they are in the room, the other people that said, I'm just exploring this. Because linking up with somebody who's similar to the place that you are in this journey can be one of the most powerful takeaways from a conference like this, much more so than information, because then you can make phone calls all along that journey and stay connected as well as you're learning different things in different contexts. So again, just kind of take note of that, where you heard around the room somebody who's in a similar place to you. So we did that in Florida 10 or so years ago. We went around the room and asked everybody to introduce themselves and share why they were there. And there were Southern accents like mine and New York accents. And then all of a sudden from the back of the room, a very different accent, which you would all recognize. You know the actual voice, but Paul and Sue both introduced themselves, and they'd flown halfway around the world to be there. So we acknowledged that. They won the longest traveled award. We celebrated them. Paul was in a different stage of their journey at Trinity, so shared a bit of that. And I really thought I didn't expect much more to come out of that, other than it was really, really fun for us to have somebody from Australia learning about the multi-site journey in a setting like this one in the States. It was a church planting conference, Exponential. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with that or have ever been there. For multi-site to be present at an American church planting conference was a little bit of a new development that had sort of been an adversarial relationship for a couple of years, and then at that stage, when Paul jumped in, everybody was making friends. So that was good to see. I'll talk a bit more about that too. But later on in the conference, and I'd say, guys, just picture all that comes to mind when you think of an American church conference. That's what it would have looked like. So there was like a convention hall with booths everywhere. I always joke with my friends, this is where Jesus would have gone and turned tables over because it was all about branding and all those kinds of things. And I was one of the few people that Paul knew. So he saw me walking through and he asked me, wait, do you know where I can get a cup of coffee? And I was like, yeah, right there. There's like a thermos. All the booths have stuff like that. And Paul said, that's not coffee. And so I understood for the first time ever how high a view of coffee you guys have. And so I was like, okay, well, tell me what you're looking for. There was a little speaker's room where they had, all the things you guys do with coffee. And Paul was very happy. And that gave us a chance to visit and get to know each other a little bit more. Not too long after that, I was living at the time in Nashville, which if there's going to be from this point forward, I'm going to use this. So I want to affirm again, Pete, you're all the way in the back. You've seen this, but there's like 20 seats up here, and I'm the least formal person in the world. So if I'm writing on this and you can't see, please come up and get where you can see the whiteboard, or at least have somebody in your group do that. I'm going to use some markers and write some words down that I want to make sure all of you guys have. And again, this is, as we've already done with the introductions, designed to be much more conversational than just presentation oriented. I'm not going to use any slides. We'll just mostly be on here for this first session. But the opportunity, I think, for me to get connected with you guys came out of those first really kind of accidental meetings with Paul and with Sue. Nashville, if you don't know the American church, is, so Paul remembered this description. I wasn't planning to use it today, but in honor of Paul and meeting him all those years ago, I did describe Nashville way back then. The Bible Belt, everybody familiar with that? That term, mostly the American South, red states, if you're thinking politically. So if you picture the Bible Belt, Nashville is the buckle of the Bible Belt. It's the thing that holds it all together. I've also referred to it as the Jerusalem of America. It's where the headquarters of the Southern Baptist Church is. That's the largest denomination in America. It's where Christian publishing is headquartered. The Christian music industry is headquartered in America. And so, you can just sort of throw gravel up in the air, and when it lands, you'll hit Christians. And that's very different than where all of you are leading and pastoring. And I know that, but that's one of the reasons I want to share it right up front. So Scott Sanders, who had joined up with Geneva Push at that point, was coming to Nashville. They were engaged in a process of learning. If you guys were, how many of y'all go all the way back to the founding of Geneva Push, like you came to some of those early days when there were 70 people at a conference? Okay, great. That's who I was meeting. That's kind of where they were when Scott was coming over. There had been, if you know, like a really significant series of events in Sydney. Mark Driscoll came over. How many of y'all read that? Okay, good. A lot of you. So y'all, that'll date where all this kind of started for me. The same thing was going on in the States. So if you were a young Christian leader with mild level of confidence, Mark could convince you that you could do it. And you would jump into church planting. But Scott's here. I just heard his laugh. So welcome, Scott. We're just talking about you. So I like to make y'all uncomfortable. Good. Mark had inspired both in Australia and in America really a church planting movement that was beginning among young Christian leaders, but there were some problems and some sustainability issues. That's really hard work. A lot of people were finding out that was really hard work. And so as Geneva Push was getting started, Scott was coming over to find out how is all of that being resourced and what are they learning in America? And it was all church planting oriented. And Paul said, you ought to go talk to Wade. You're going to Nashville anyway to meet with some of these denominational leaders and the resources they provide. And Scott didn't really want to meet with me. It was Multisite, not church planting. So he just said, I'm going to be in Nashville if you want to get together. I was doing it kind of as a favor to Paul. I didn't know who Scott was. So we set aside the full total of 30 minutes. for our meeting at a McDonald's. That's where all of this began. And so that 30 minutes turned into kind of the whole afternoon. And the reason I share all of that, guys, is because what came out of that meeting with Scott and I in Nashville all those years ago was this idea. And still the same idea that's driving this first session today. Is there anything in the American multi-site journey that might be helpful to leaders in Australia when it comes to reproducing congregations? That's the question. Is there anything in the American multi-site journey that might be helpful to Australian church leaders in reproducing congregations? That's what we asked all those years ago, and that's still to this day what we're asking. What I've learned since then is sometimes. That's really the honest answer. Sometimes there are things that are very helpful. And as an example of that, I met with Hunter Bible yesterday. It was one of the most encouraging meetings for me to catch up with them and their whole staff team. Tears were shed as we honored some of the things that God has done in the life of that congregation over the last 20 years. They are teaching through a series on Romans. They were in Romans 1 yesterday when we visited with them, and they remembered that 20 years ago, Greg Lee had also taught a series on Romans 1. I asked how big they were then when they taught that series 20 years ago, and they were 40 people, so about half the size of this room. And on Easter, there were almost 1,400 people that attended their church. And I laughed with them that when they were 40 people, I wouldn't have bet on them to get to 1,400. I don't bet anyway, but y'all know what I'm saying. But that's what God has done over that last 20 years, and it's been a privilege to see some of these things be helpful to them. In other church settings, it's been less so. Guys have been able to look at the information we're going to share with you, and again, turn it over and look at it and feel like this is probably not the thing that God is leading us to. And both of those, to me, are really good outcomes. I don't present this in any way as normative or prescriptive or something you should do. I think it's something you should familiarize yourself with. That's what today's all about. You'll have access to people like Derek who know this really, really well. What emerged out of the initial meetings for me with Scott were some trips over here and some opportunities for both Scott and Derek to join me on consulting trips to churches all over the United States in all different stages of development. So I set up a multi-site road trip for Scott to go to the hub or home where all of this started at Willow Creek in Chicago. And it was really fun as Scott and I were getting to know each other for him to call me from the church. And if y'all know Scott, you know his voice. I can't do it really well, but y'all know it. So he called me loudly on the phone. There's a food court in the church. And an escalator in the church. And I was like, yeah, I know. I've been there. That's why I sent you there. Because, but that really was part of his learning journey. And then seeing us work with churches like that, but also going to the Pacific Northwest and working with churches where there is not a cultural inclination to go to church, where they're starting much more in a place like you guys are, not having even heard the gospel or knowing what churches do, and exploring whether, wrestling with churches like there that are exploring multi-site too, and then bringing those journey, all that learning back here and helping consult with you guys and some of that expertise being available. So let's dive in. Y'all good? Everybody ready? I really mean it, guys. If we only have a little bit of time together, if a little caffeine would help you, if you need to use the bathroom, please take advantage of all those kind of things. I'll do my best to get the more boring stuff out there so we can talk about the stuff that maybe more specifically applies to each of you as we go. But let's re-energize all those muscles you used back in Bible college and seminary. Get the notepad out or your computer if you're going to take notes there. Lock in. We're doing this early in the day because everybody's fresh and ready. We're going to get the American model up there, where it came from, how it works, what doesn't work so well about it, so that all of you guys can see it. If you have questions as we move through this, you can always catch me during breaks. I'm glad to and love talking about all that. but we're also going to have some extended time at the end to talk about questions. So I'd just make sure that you note those so that we have an opportunity to come back to those questions at the end. All right. I also would encourage you to be thinking about anything I put up here. Be thinking about whether this is the same as, or if it's different, how it's different than the churches in the countries that you guys represent here. We've already heard New Zealand and Australia and South Africa. And then even within contexts like Australia, you guys know Melbourne is very different to Sydney. I mean, there's very contextualized differences for all of these. So some of this may be very applicable and some may not be, but that's what I'd encourage you to be thinking about. So what is a multi-site church? I just would use this very simple little acronym, 1N, 2 plus. A multi-site church is one church in 2 or more locations. That's what a multi-site church is. So if you ask what's different about a multi-site church than a church plant, if you plant a church plant, you're planting a church. If you plant a multi-site location, you're reproducing your church. That's the difference in the two. And so what makes things your church? Well, that answer is very different in every setting too, because there are different polities represented here. There are different philosophies of ministry represented here. You know your church though. And so when you're reproducing your church, you're reproducing all those things. So how you do a budget, who has authority to hire and fire, what the name of the church is. All of those kinds of things are just little indications of what it looks like to reproduce your church. But when your church starts meeting in 2 or more locations, you're a multi-site church. So I'll give a little pop quiz. If we were meeting in this room and we had hymns, no instruments, and then young people were meeting in the next room over and they had a rock band, and all that's going on here at Gosford Presbyterian Church, are we a multi-site church? In our definition, we would say no, those are venues. Y'all might call them congregations, but that's all at the same location. So remember, it's 2 or more locations. What if it's on the other side of the parking lot? The venue's in the gym, or the student life center, what family life center that you guys have? Does that make you a multi-site church? No? No, because it's still in the same location. So how far away do you have to get to be 2 or more locations? Any thoughts? Far enough to frustrate you. All right? That's the answer. If it's a little bit difficult to get over there, like you have to deal with some traffic, or you have to get in your car and it's an annoying drive, then you're starting to get into multi-site territory. To the point that staff can't easily get back and forth between the two. Now, I'm going to skip ahead for just one thing because I want to cover this distance. Is there an ideal distance to be away from one another? And the answer is, in our context, yes, there is. It's 20 minutes is the ideal distance for this model to work. Now, this is the point where I look out there and everybody's looking at everybody else on their team and saying, we're closer, we're further. We'll cover all that. But I just want you to know, one church in 2 or more locations is what a multi-site church is. And it does not mean 2 or more things going on the same site or in different venues on the same site. It means genuinely different locations. Some of those might be closer than 20 minutes, some might be further away. I heard 7 hours earlier. That's stretching the limits even of this model. So I'll be very interested to hear how that goes. But everybody good with what a multi-site church is? All right? Okay. Now I'm going to tell you where it came from and kind of how it works in our context. So we have 330 million people in the United States, and we have about 300,000 mainline denominational churches. So I can't draw at all, so I just say what I'm drawing. That's a church, okay? So we have 300,000 of these in what I would call mainline denominations. And I'm going to put a little minus sign here because for about 40 years, the numbers change depending on which denomination you're looking at, but these have been declining for generations in our context in America. There are a few exceptions, but for the most part, we see the evidence of that decline all over the country. So we see churches closing. We see, and really significant churches with historical influence in major cities. We see less people going to seminaries in these mainline denominations to the point that seminaries are closing or are moving just online. So We see all of the things that you guys have had to navigate here in different cities. We see the struggle between progressive, sort of liberal views of what the Bible teaches, or even going beyond what the Bible teaches, and efforts to retain sort of conservative, orthodox, faithful, biblical Christianity. All of that's been going on for generations. So this is, if I were, again, just describing it, we're losing ground in America, in our mainline denominations. And I do think, as I've talked with many of you over the last 10 years, that resonates with most of you. Culturally, what you're experiencing, your different denominations, it feels like we're losing ground. Churches are struggling. It's very hard to get people, young leaders, to go into this line of work in the first place. Now, what I'm going to describe next, I think is a little bit different than what you guys have experienced here. But what we experienced in the United States was the development and extreme growth of something completely new, which is the megachurch. There is a book, if you're interested in this model, and it was designed like on a whiteboard with some really gifted leaders, Rick Warren, Bill Hybels, those may be names that you're familiar with. They're the generation above me in America. So they're now you may know their individual stories too, but that would be the generation of leaders in the megachurch that are now stepping out of leadership and where succession is taking place. The book is, it's Drucker and Me. So Peter Drucker is a management consultant in America. He's Austrian, but he was a Stanford professor through a lot of this. Does that name translate here, Peter Drucker? Yeah, management guru. He wrote like 40 or 50 books. So through a businessman's connection, these guys all went to Peter Drucker and designed the megachurch. Okay? So whenever, I love to watch y'all's faces when I say American megachurch. It's always just really, really fun. That's the same reaction Scott had going to Willow Creek. But Rick Warren in Saddleback and Bill Hybels at Willow Creek became, as they implemented this model for the first time, those were the two most influential congregations or churches in America for a generation. So if you've ever read Purpose Driven Life or Purpose Driven Church or Willow Creek, anybody go to the Global Leadership Summit or watch it online ever? Yeah, a few of y'all. Those would have been things that everybody in America would have gone and learned from during this stage. So over this generation, there have been about 1,500 of these that have popped up all around the United States, and there are 2,000 people or more. And I'll put over here under the main line, when I should have put that in the box too, about 300 people is the average church size over here. So very different. 300 people or 2,000 people. And very little overlap between the two. Most of these grew up as non-denominational churches. That's how they were designed initially. Over time, we did see a few denominations over here start adopting these or seeing those grow up. But I just want you guys to know they're like two completely different streams. And to use an American word, this one became the cool one. Okay? So young leaders all wanted to be in that stream. Even more recently, there have been about 100 churches that have hit the 10,000 mark. And those are very unique mega churches. So again, that'll have some importance in what I'll share here in just a minute. So any mega churches in your spheres? Like, I'm just curious. This is a genuine question, not rhetorical. Can you all name them for me or size-wise where they are? Yeah. Okay, so how the Bible would fall in there? Yeah. All right, Hillsong would be in it. Familiarity with Hillsong? Anybody ever been? All right, when you go to Hillsong, you're seeing one of these. So, design, stage. Scott says he can spot a megachurch just by the stage, which I agree with. But the way the music is presented, kind of that feel to that, a very defined sermon, felt needs. Y'all with me? Not value judging it. I'm just saying that's what it is.
So one of the key things is you're not just saying megachurches aside. There's a particular prescriptive model about how you do everything within the church.
Yes.
That makes it a megachurch, not just a large church.
Yes, and that defining value would typically be on the American side, excellence. Could y'all hear Derek's question?
Yeah.
It's not just size. There's a way you go about doing things that sort of puts you in this category. And the way that you go about doing things tends to produce the churches that fall into this category. So it's an operating system, to use that terminology. And it's a very distinctive one and new one in our landscape. So what happened when this thing started emerging was people thought, and I'm going to be simplifying this just in the interest of time. There's a lot of nuance to all of this. But people would have thought, like Rick Warren started Saddleback out of the trunk of his car. So at that point, that would have, a church of 1,000 people would have felt huge. But then you end up with a church like this size coming together and you think, we should build, when we build a building, we should build one bigger than we need. We should build it for 500 people, like all of us together. And what would happen in America is we would, on the very first day, have 600 people show up. That's what happened in these models. How many of y'all have that problem? What are we going to do with all these people? Y'all have that? Yeah, that's a very unique kind of thing. We didn't have it either over here. But that's what started happening here. So what would Americans do when you have more people show up than you have room for? Build bigger. And that's exactly the language that was used. We built too small. We should build bigger. So then you build something that holds 1,000 people. And 1,200 people show up on the first day. So what do you do again? Build bigger. Build bigger. That pushed everything out to the greenfields and in the suburbs. Because you need parking once you start getting into 1,000 people and 1,500 people and 2,000 people. So almost all of these are in the suburbs. The vast majority of them are in the Bible Belt too. But we would build to 3,000 or 5,000 and still be full. At some point, you can no longer keep building bigger. So what do you do then? And that's where Multisite began to develop. And this is the only thing I would really encourage you all to write down and again take and turn over. Multisite was not developed initially to make more and better disciples. It was not developed initially to address issues in the church that were related directly to biblical teaching. Multisite was developed initially to solve a space issue. If I could stress anything about the model and its original sort of formative foundations, it would be that. Picture very large churches, mostly in greenfield suburbs with growing subdivisions all around them, running out of room and running out of room and running out of room, and still knowing that there are more people that we can reach. And there are pastors leading these who want to reach more people. So what do? And this is where the story starts to become a little bit more personal for me. I'll connect all those dots in just a minute. But what ended up happening was this megachurch model birthed Multisite. And it's much smaller than the megachurch. Okay? And again, I can't draw, so this is not only a church, but it's a church that's supposed to look like that one. Okay? This thing in the middle has ties to both. But what you start seeing, these are around 350 people. Has been the average size of these Multisite campus launches. They're much, much smaller than the megachurches that launched them out. And this dates to 9/11. So Derek mentioned Jim Tomberlin. He was invited to go to Willow Creek, the church I mentioned earlier with Bill Hybels. I'm going to say another thing that I like to watch your faces when I say it. He was given $10 million to design this model. Okay? Y'all ever had that problem? We've already had what do I do with all these people. Now we have what do I do with all this money. So, yeah, just want to make sure we get a good gulf in there between this model and what we all deal with day to day. So Chicago, very, very large, historic American city. Willow would be one of these in the suburbs. Scott's been there, as I said earlier. It kind of looks like a college campus when you arrive. How do we reproduce that around all of Chicagoland? And there were 8 or 10 churches around the country in different stages of asking that same question. Can we launch other locations of our church in other places? And Jim invited all of them to come together at Willow on 9/11. So we always know how to date the first gathering of this movement because only about half of them were able to make it in. And they had to make the decision, do we still meet or do we go out and go back home and try to help? It was a massive event in our country. They did decide on that day to still meet. And what they learned was nobody had a single model for how to do this. But everybody so just to give you some examples, and this is where I think some of this development work that was going on then 20 years ago in America begins to apply to where you guys are today, as I've learned a little bit about the stories of the different churches you're in. None of them had the same approach on 9/11 when they got together. I want to reinforce that. None of them had the same approach. They were all doing multi-site church differently. So the largest church in America today and most influential would be Life Church. Craig Rochelle, do you all know that? So they are 28 locations across multiple states. I think on Easter this year they had 200,000 people attend one of those locations. So massive scale, way beyond what a local church would normally be. But back in 2001, they were very, very different to that, like very different. So they had 2 locations. One was an original church plant that Craig was teaching in, and one was a church, a very large church. How many of y'all have been to America? Most of you. Anybody drive around the South? See churches with the large crosses on the interstate? Anyone? All right, good. That's a thing there, if you're not familiar with it. It's like an invitation to come to that church. When I say large, whatever you're picturing, just like double or triple it. You see it from several cities away. A church like that asked Craig if he would adopt them. They'd gone through some real struggles and lost a pastor. And Craig's heart as a pastor, Dominic, is pastor's heart. I've been on Pastor's Heart. We're actually going to do it again. I'll promote that for Dominic as well. The heart that Craig had to reach his city caused him to say yes. And he was doing multi-site by putting a couple 100,000 miles a year on his car, driving back and forth between the 2 sites. Has anybody done that? Yes? You raise your hand if you've driven back and forth between different locations and preached. Yes? Yes, done ministry? Yes? All right. In 20 years, you will be 200,000 people. In 28, no, I'm just kidding. But there are all those kinds of approaches going on here. That's not sustainable. Like Craig is a dynamic guy. He can. I've gotten to be friends with the operations person that helped design their model. The last time I was there, Craig had taken up deep water diving, where you hold your breath forever. You've all ever done that? He was like setting records in the first. So very fit, disciplined leader. It still wears you out. You might be able to do it for 2 years. He can do it for 4, but you just can't sustain that for very long. But you got these churches that you're now responsible for. So what do? And that's where video came in. So what began to be true is that these experimental models started to either fall away or be limited in terms of the number of locations they could serve. So it'd be like, we have 1, and that's about all we can do because everybody's exhausted all the time. Or they started to fit into a newer model where video was being used. And that's what was developed at Willow Creek. So, this would become not just 1, but 3 or 4. And video would be used to transmit the sermon to each of those on Sunday so that it wasn't having to be done at every one of those locations. And the guy that developed that model is Jim Tomberlin. And to this day, if you look up Jim Tomberlin on social media, Jim is one of my favorite people in the world. He's a pastor and a very, very significant voice in my own life. But his online presence is all under the Multisite guy. And the reason for that is everybody around the country who was asking, how are you doing this? This isn't something they taught us in seminary. What are you doing to do that? They would call Willow Creek, and who would they ask for? The Multisite guy. They didn't know Jim's name, so they just asked, hey, is the Multisite guy there? And he started getting so many calls from all of these churches about how to do this, that he actually went out on his own and formed Multisite Solutions, and then kind of put everything under that banner of the multi-site guy and became the recognized, like, defining, not only founder and developer of the model, but the expert in coordinating and connecting all the different churches that were navigating that from 2001 to about 2013 or so when I met him. So now I'm going to just close off my time by connecting to that to my own personal story. And this is what we're going to look at from here on out. I never led here, okay? Which is why we all like each other so much. Y'all didn't either. I didn't either. Scott liked that I didn't, although he always tells the story of me driving up in a sports car. And I have to tell everybody it was like a 12-year-old car that I had to make run myself. Like that Scott likes to paint me in this picture to get back at me calling him out sometimes. But I didn't lead here. I led here. And not only did I lead here, but I didn't even lead in an influential church here or an influential state here. When Derek says Louisiana, I just watch all of y'all. And he says, like, what's the fight? And nobody ever knows. So y'all are all like, which one is Louisiana? You know, like, that's where I was. So I'm in the middle of nowhere over here. Intentionally. My wife and I were just beginning to raise a family. I left a really big law firm and the stress of a big law firm practice. I was representing Lloyd's of London at the time. It was very, very demanding. And I saved up all that money and started my own law firm. And I miscalculated one of the most essential ingredients in starting a law firm. I didn't know where clients came from. And I didn't realize that until I'd spent all that money on trying to start a law firm. So I had a ton of time on my hands. And in that time, we started a church, my wife and I, around the conference room table of our law firm. So it was, all that spare time was used very redemptively. And that I thought would just be kind of a lay leader relationship for me. I just thought I would be supportive of real pastors leading that small church plant. But over time, found myself drawn more and more and more to going back to school. I closed down the law firm, began serving in leadership of the church, and genuinely, guys, genuinely thought I would do that for the next 50 years. That's what I wanted to do. It was one of the sweetest seasons of my life. I pray that all of you as leaders in the church get to experience seasons like that. In fact, I'll just ask, have you had super sweet seasons in ministry? Can y'all just raise your hand? They're the reason why you went into it in the first place. I love seeing almost all the hands go up. For those of you that didn't, I really hope you get that. Where you wake up with joy every day and can't believe you get to go do what you do for a living. That's what I had. I didn't have any ambitions about going over here. I loved the team I worked with. I loved seeing people come to faith. We were on a college campus. I came to faith in college and got to experience that in our church. The only way I got connected to any of this over here on the right is I had another church, and this is where I would have been exactly where you're sitting today. I had another church ask, would you consider adopting us? And they were a larger church than us. They had a big, nice building, but they owed $4 million on the building. We were in a very not nice building, and we didn't know anything and had no ambitions to make it nice. And all of a sudden, the responsibility to make that decision sort of started to fall on my shoulders. And so I called, who do y'all think I called? The Multisite guy. And he was like, I'm just telling y'all where we started, just like I did with me and Scott. Jim was like, I really don't come to Louisiana very much. So we weren't able to get on his radar with all the influential churches he was working with. And I was like, well, this was my pitch to Jim. Wouldn't you like to know if Multisite would work in a really rural setting like this? And Jim was like, that is a great question. All right, I'll come. So we had our merger conversations over the course of a year. Jim became a great friend. Like I said, he's one of my favorite people in the world. I love Jim. I love his family. He came out of this world into our world, and both churches voted to merge, and we found ourselves operating as a multi-site church in the middle of nowhere in Louisiana, with no real clue about how to do it other than calling Jim Tomberlin. So that was my most dialed number for 2 years in a row. And as long as he kept picking up, I was going to keep calling him. I just had question after question after question about how to do this. To accelerate the rest of the story, guys, Jim invited me to serve with Multisite Solutions and then to consider becoming a successor there. He felt like, as we got to know one another, that the years I had served practicing law and the kind of the analytical ability that develops, and then the years I'd served as a local pastor and the heart that develops might fit well. And so that's where I was when I met Paul. See, we're starting to connect dots now. I was evaluating, is that what the Lord is leading me to do and the way he's leading me to serve when I met with Paul. So Paul got to see Jim teach. And this is what I want you to know about most of what you've ever read about the American Multisite Church. Again, you now know where it came from. You know how it was developed. When it was taught to that point, every time I ever saw it taught, it was taught with a lot of clarity and simplicity and conviction around an approach, which is this one. So, y'all remember how far away should a location be? 20 minutes. That was like a rule. 20 minutes. How do you deliver the sermon to the other location? How would you do that? Video. Yeah. What should children's ministry look like at the new location? Exactly like it looks like at the original location. So that would have been what Paul was hearing. And Paul will tell you when he comes up, he was thinking, okay, this is very different to what I'm doing. But he got some language around all of that. What I want you to know from me as we start diving more and more in the day into all of these actual details and what might be applicable to you guys is, as I learned this world, and as I prayed through it, it just kind of settled for me. Jim is an expert in that world. It's not necessarily the world I want to invest the rest of my life in. So I shared that with him. And that led to a fork in the road for me. And here's where the last few years have been for me. Over here, the last 10 years especially has been the development not just of an or a multi-site model, but about 6 or 8 different approaches to multi-site that are all in various stages of development in each one. Okay? So everybody always asks me the same questions and things like this. Which is better, church planting or multi-site? And I always answer jokingly, both are better. They're both better because you end up with a new congregation somewhere where there wasn't one before. But the best one is the one that fits you best, or the leader that you're going to launch best, because that's the one you'll stick with. And so I don't think there's one magic arrow that everybody should apply. I think you're looking for the one that fits you best. And if I could give you anything in that analysis, wherever you are in your journey, it would be to give you the freedom to genuinely ask that question, especially if you're the senior minister. Which one actually fits me best? Which one do I get excited about the most? Which one would I stick with the most? Which one would I have energy for? Whether it comes to church planting and multi-site, or how you specifically would do multi-site. So what began to happen for me over the course of that 5 years that I jumped into this is I found myself working with those 6 or 8 streams. I had some knowledge about this model, but can you do mergers, multi-site mergers, as a revitalization strategy for a denomination? That's a stream. Can multi-site churches launch without doing video? That's a stream. Y'all with me? Every one of these. And the answer is all yes. Like, you can. And I have loved learning from churches who are doing all of those different streams as they move forward. Can you, within a denomination in Adelaide, launch a little sub-network of churches that are interconnected under the same name of Trinity? Can you do that? Yes, y'all are about to learn about it from Paul and how he did it. So that's another one. All these churches in Australia that are doing things in their own way. Y'all with me? Now, here's the challenge, and this is where I'll close this opening session. Everybody, not everybody, many people think that what they need to do is to develop their own model from scratch. If I could disabuse you of any notion, it would be that one. Everybody would like to have a completely novel, completely bespoke, completely customized approach to Multisite that you developed. If you go down that road, you may get there, but it's going to take you a lot longer, and you're going to learn many of the same lessons that we've all learned over the last 20 or 30 years. And I don't think you have to do that. So what I would encourage you, again, whether you're talking about launching your first one, or you're looking at launching your fourth one, or you have questions about sustainability or video or any of these other kinds of things, find out what everybody else has learned over these last 20 or 30 years and how many of those lessons might apply for you. And then look at customizing maybe 10 or 20% of the model. Because these things have been developed uniquely over this last 10 years, there's likely a stream very similar to yours. And there are likely a couple of further steps down the path. Now, there may be differences. Many of these are in highly Christian contexts where people want to go to church, and you may not be. So the scale might be smaller, or the length of time it takes to do it might take longer, or the risk profile might look different. Y'all with me? But you don't have to develop your own model from scratch. You're trying to take a percentage of this whole thing and get yourself further down the road as you make these decisions. The other thing I would say and strongly recommend is to get a guide. I write that in all caps on whatever you're taking notes on. Get a guide who's been down this road before. If there's somebody in your city who's done Multisite a few stages ahead of you, get to know them really, really well. Start buying them lunches. Find out how they made the decisions they did, what they would do differently if they did it again. In this room, connect with people around the room who are in the same or just ahead of you as they evaluate these kinds of things. And failing all of that, or in addition to all of that, call Derek. So he said that was a shameless plug for Dominic earlier. I'm going to give a shameless plug for Derek. Derek and Scott know this in the Australian context better than anybody out there. They travel around to all these cities for a living and have done the same thing in America as they've learned it. That's why they set up opportunities like this, is to serve you. And so the practical decisions that you'll make all along this journey will be much more informed if you have a guide. I cannot stress that enough. There are very few people, although I celebrate it, I just acknowledge there are very few Paul Harringtons that are able to see a model emerge in their context almost completely from scratch without a guide. And so take and learn from history, which he's about to share with all of you as well. All right, my time is almost up. I need to close by sharing with you guys, this is confessional, now that we all know each other so well. I'll confess right here at the end that in my Multisite journey, I betrayed all of my principles and joined a church staff in this world. Not just in this world, but in this part of this world. All right? So that means you can just ignore everything. No, I'm just kidding. For the last 5 years, I've served on staff at McClean Bible Church in Washington, D.C. The reason that I did that is because I felt like somebody needs to give some serious time trying to answer the question of what's going to become of all of these after Rick Warren, after Bill Hybels, after Jim Tomberlin, especially when the demands of leading one of these are so taxing that very few people are actually choosing to do it. So I read a quote from Bill Hybels of what would become of Willow Creek when he's no longer there. And he said, it'll be a junior college. And that just stuck with me. Like, y'all know, does junior college translate? A school. Yeah. Yeah, like an introduction to college. It'll be a school. And I just thought, we're going to have 1,500 churches who start putting a minus sign for the next generation if somebody doesn't tackle this. And it's been very, very taxing and challenging. I serve alongside some great leaders. Our leadership team there is David Platt and Mike Kelsey. It's one of the most strategic cities in the world in Washington, D.C. It's also one of the most challenging to do ministry because everybody in Washington, D.C. gets paid to fight with each other. And then we all go to church together on Sunday. So there have been all kinds of challenges around all of that. It's been a privilege to still get to invest in these models as I'm learning to develop some models here that might have application beyond what was developed mostly for the baby boomer generation as we move forward. So that's where it comes from. That's why it all looks the same in that world, and that's why we now have all these new streams beginning to emerge as well. You're now going to hear from one of those, from Paul, and I think Derek's going to come back up and lead into that. But I wanted you to have that big map at 30,000 feet as we start diving in closer and closer and closer.
Thanks, Wade. Okay, so that's... I think that was for me, Wade, not you then. But thanks. Yeah, okay. We are going to have lunch now. Can you just take a minute or two to just pause and write down one reflection you've got, one thought you've got. I'm not going to ask you to share it now, but just worth pausing after that. The session next is going to be hearing a real life, as Wade said, a real life example, the pain and the thankful moments in Trinity. And then when Wade comes back, we're digging into these models here, the nuts and bolts. This is the point at which, as well, the questions you've got on the ground in your context, it'd be great if you brought as well. So Wade will pull this apart when he comes back later. We've got 3 sessions. The Harringtons next. Wade will come back, and then we'll have a bit of an overflow and a Q&A session at the end as well. But that's the plan for the afternoon. For lunch, if you could just head... I don't know if they've finished just yet, so I'll go ahead. They haven't finished. Okay. Yeah, all right. Yeah, so maybe 2 thoughts. I don't know if you can do that. 2 thoughts, not 1. But, wait. Yep. Okay, Wade's coming back. Yeah, do you want to... How about you do a Q&A? Excellent, that's great. Have you got your headset? Okay. Just loudly.
Yeah. So when the multi-site grew out of Mega, is there a new arrow from the main line to multi-site? It's not just coming out of Mega anymore, so the culture is different in the multis?
When somebody asks a question that good, I always want to just give them the mic. Yeah, you're anticipating like years of development in the States. So yes, if we had a week and we were just diving into this model at like the most minute level of detail, I would say in a way that this model rejected this one, and it actually began to oppose one another. They actually began to adopt this one. For some reason, so to prove that, from a data standpoint, you got to 1,500 megachurches. We're now somewhere, depending on how you count them, between 5,000 or 8,000 multi-site churches. So much wider adoption. And that additional adoption is not from megachurches. They're limited in number. It's from mainline churches who see opportunities for just what you guys are evaluating, reproduction of a congregation or a location in a way that feels possible when this did not. This feels impossible to a lot of the churches here because of the level of investment you need. And also the church governance, church polity is not super friendly to see all the things happen that you need to do here. It's like property prohibitive for a lot of cities. This feels a lot more possible. So yes, much, much, much wider adoption. Great question.
Is there any correlation between that group starting to do it and the variety of models of it?
Yes, direct correlation. Because what you begin to get, this shares a starting point and a journey. It's very recognizable. This is as diverse as you can get. And so when they start to dive into how to do this, you get convictions like I get here, like, well, we want to do multi-site, but we're not doing video. Like, don't even mention video. And so that develops its own track. We can do 1, I think, but we can't do 4. And that starts to develop its own track. You get denominational leaders who start developing pathways to help. Like, we have buildings, you have people. What if we, so that has developed its own track. Can you do this evangelistically? Not just transfer growth. That has developed its own track. Yes, you start to see, because of the different starting points and all the different philosophies, these start to look very different to one another. Also, a great question.
Wait,
Wait, we may be done.
No. We've got about 3 minutes. That's good.
7 or 8 minutes. Okay.
Can you flesh out more the 20-minute thing?
Yeah.
What goes wrong if you're too close?
Yeah, so this developed in the original model. So if I don't give you that disclaimer of what I'm talking about, stop me. Because y'all need to know every time I answer one of these questions, am I talking about here in all these streams, or am I talking about the original model? In the original model, and again, there's a little nuance to all these that I'm just kind of not yet covering up. We'll talk some more later, but in the original model, these are a fair reproduction, but not a full reproduction of the main location. And if they're too close together, people just drive right past these and go to that one. So if you put it 5 minutes away, it's like, the children's ministry is way better. There's way more kids my age in the student ministry there, and they go past these. If you put it 60 minutes away, then everybody here struggles to even stay connected. And so you start stretching the one church idea, especially on the first launch, to the point that it can get really, really strained to even get everybody together for a staff meeting when you're that far away all week. And so, now all of that in new technologies and new approaches and getting better at these things. When I hear 7 hours now, I don't think, wait, we got to talk, that's impossible. I'm not trying to stop that because we've actually seen that work too. But you have to commit to some things for it to stay one church. That distance will work against. So there need to be some really clear strategies there. So too close is an issue and too far away is an issue. And I'll just say in America, I'd be curious to know what this is in y'all cities. 20 minutes is about how far we'll drive without getting annoyed. So, when you start having to drive an hour somewhere, a lot of Americans won't do it. Or you have to sit in traffic for 40 minutes. But on a Sunday morning, a 20-minute drive feels very easy and doable. So that's a factor too. Yes?
Wade, you mentioned exponential before. They talk a lot about microchurch and that
Yeah.
kind of thing. So in terms of multi-site, what size are we talking? The microchurch plans count as part of multi-site in your thinking?
It's a great question. So I'm going to struggle to get all this in 4 minutes. But the question was about microsites and how those might count or not count. Is anybody here doing microsites?
What's microsite?
Okay, that's why I said 4 minutes might be a stretch. We may ought to talk about that one off because I want to do things that help the whole group. Yeah. But y'all imported something over to us in the missional church world. Is that where it translated? And that does have some application. There is a stream of missional multi-site that I think we could talk about more too. Yep. Last one.
What's the advantage of long-term multi-site as opposed to becoming a multi-church?
A multi-church? Yeah, so that'll be the third session. You can do, again, guys, when y'all ask me questions like, can you do X? My answer is always going to be yes. So can you do multi-site as long-term church planting? Yes. What I said to one of the churches that's here in this room when I met with them this week is, think of your kids. Do you have kids? You're always better to start with the curfew earlier and move it later than start with it later and try to move it up. The same thing's true with autonomy. You're always much better to start with a closer relationship with more authority in the sending congregation and then release that over time than you are to start very free and released and then ever try to pull that back. One way has almost no tension and it feels like freedom and empowerment. And the other way feels like you're grounding me. I had all this freedom before, and now I can't make decisions. So the lessons like that are really, really specific. But we'll talk more about multi-church and multi-site in the third session. All right, I think.
Well, here's the situation. We've got more people on this site than we had initially anticipated. So just put your hand up if you didn't register. No, don't do that. It's great you were here. It warms my heart, the fact that is the problem. It also means there are not quite as many lunches here, and so we're doing the equivalent of a Macca's run at the moment. It's not Macca's. We're just going to get some more food and bring it. So we've probably got 5 more minutes if you can hang in. Do you want to pick Wade's brains for another 5 minutes? Is that all right? Okay, let's do that. All right. And if food will arrive. Okay.
All right, so I'll just come back to that question, and again, I'll preview the third session, but multi-site in this model originally was very high control. This church made the decisions about what all these would look like. Multi-site in some of these different expressions, control looks very different as well, and you start to get words like multi-church because this doesn't exist. And different polities affect those relationships in different ways. Yes, I think his hand was up first, Jack.
I think my question relates to that, but do you see the multi-site model as the ultimate aim being that the multi-site is long-term, or is it a step on the way to independence? separate churches?
Y'all are asking great questions. I mean, I'm genuinely, great question. There's two things that I would consider on that. The harder the location is where you're launching, the more inclined I would be for it to stay very closely connected to the sending church. The higher the degree of difficulty. So the more missional in the sense that it feels, the more you'll need that support. And I would say even to the degree that you might not ever talk about it being released. You might be thinking that as the leader, but I don't know that I would even introduce it into the conversation if it's in a difficult setting or if it feels especially difficult for your church. That's one. Number two is there is such a thing to me as just a very gifted leader. And you guys can spot them when they're young. That changes all these rules to me. And in the same way, who did I mean earlier that parachute planted into somewhere in this original stage? Where is he? I want to make an Australian feel uncomfortable. Okay, he's in the plane. He's in the other room. Can somebody get... No. Yeah, we were talking earlier. Derek introduced me. Just in the early stages of Geneva Push, planted, parachuted in somewhere, started a church. It worked. Like, that's impossible. And some of you guys are able to do it. Even in difficult situations, you might have a leader like that, where you can have conversations with them about what this would look like for it to become its own thing, if you know that's the likely outcome from the very beginning. Those are rarer than you think. I'd get somebody assessed before you start making those determinations, because you don't want it to be like, Mike's a good guy. I've known him forever. That's not enough. It's a really dynamic leadership gift that you're looking for if there's an exception. So I would recommend, in most cases, tending, even over here, to start pretty tight and only loosen some of that autonomy as you go, especially while you're setting the model. Joel?
With the multi-site model, for those that are committed to serving in that space, is any focus back towards the hub?
How's that?
For those in the multi-site,
they're here.
if they're there, if they're looking back to a hub model, is there much investment back into that hub around excellence and the like, or are they really focused on the multi-site?
Really focused here. Yeah. If you're having to pull people from here back to serve a hub, it's an indication of a problem. Here. Yeah.
Where would you go to read? You mentioned 6 to 8 types of multi-site. Where would you read that?
Can I pull that together for our afternoon? I'll even just have it. I'll send it to y'all. I did. My phone's on the floor, Derek. I did read a new article since I've been in Australia that I would recommend reading even over the break before Paul comes back up, and I'll share that with y'all. This should fire some thoughts up. So it's Michael F. Bird on Substack. He has the creative title of Is Multisite Good? That's a really, really, really helpful read for you guys in this room, and talks about some of the different model approaches, but there's some other more exhaustive reads too. I'll get those for you for the third session. Great question.
That was Wade Burnett, and there are more of these sessions to come, so keep an eye out for it. I hope you are still thinking about how you will continue to see God's church expanded and growing throughout the world. I'm Pete Hughes. Chat soon.